Let's talk about scandalous stuff, not like the Lewinsky scandal, that's too much. We're going to get into a couple of different things that are listed here, and I'll try to go point by point. What people started to do is stock companies started to market the buying and selling of stocks in a way to get more middle class people to buy them. And that was called the first thing, called buying on margin. Okay? Buying on margin basically means this. You can't afford the $300 of an Apple share, so why not buy part of it? Buy the margin of it. Maybe you can only afford $25 of it right now. That means that whoever sold it to you, a stockbroker, is going to be owed at some point the remainder of the value. So 300 minus 25 is, thank goodness you guys are good at math, 275. So that means you're buying part of the share, but you got to pay it off later. So what started to happen was you had so many people that couldn't afford the whole value of the share, and people were buying just parts of the shares. Okay? And when people start doing that, may I go back real quick? Hold up now. Just hold up. When people start buying little pieces of the shares, what starts to happen to the value of the market, it starts to go up, 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 up. And look at what's starting to happen all throughout 1928 and 1929. It's going up, 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 up. More people than ever are buying, but they're not buying the whole share of the stock. They're not buying the whole thing. That's what's called stock speculation. When people are buying into the market and the value of the stock market starts becoming artificially high because people are only buying part of the share. It happens not anymore, thank God. But back in the day, there was no regulation whatsoever. Companies could get away with this, and they wanted people to buy part of the shares because at least they were buying. Because they didn't want rich people to just buy the shares. They wanted like middle class people, scary looking people to buy stuff. They didn't want Monopoly guy buying shares all the time. Okay. Well, guess what starts to happen? So these companies have started to sell all their shares to people that can't possibly cover the cost of the shares. So what starts to happen is the companies start freaking out because they're starting to lose money. Okay, so you're Apple again. You've sold $25 of a share that's worth $300 to Joe Blow. Joe Blow doesn't have the money to pay the $275. And you're Apple and you're like, dude, where's the $275? Are you ever going to pay me that? And Joe Blow's like, no, because I don't have that kind of money. You told me I could buy it on margin. You didn't tell me about the part where I had to pay it by Apple. And then Apple's like, oh, come on, man. So what happens is that stockbrokers, because the values, no one's ever going to pay those values back, they start selling the stocks back in order so that they don't lose more money. And so you have what's called a sell-off. If I go back to this, where it says Black Tuesday right up at the crest there on, I guess, 1929, like right at the end of 1929, that's what starts to happen. The investors start freaking out that no one's ever going to pay these things back, and that starts to devalue the stocks. And so when stocks become devalued, people try to sell them faster than they're buying them. And that's what starts to happen. You have what's called panic selling, and it lasts starting on October 29th in 1929. It lasts all the way up until the beginning of 1930. So for almost a whole month, we're losing value, 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 value. Stock market's starting to crash, crash, crash. And then you've got a huge economic mess. Now, honestly, in my opinion, what I just explained to you, if it confuses you, that's fine, be confused. The stock market is awfully confusing. In this case, what I would tell you is, if you're studying, try to understand the concept of buying on margin, buying only part of the stock. Don't worry about panic selling, the science of it. I can just tell you that resulted in tremendous losses and tremendous problems as time went on. Now, here's what the ripple effect was on the surface. And here's a cool little model here. You're like, whoa, that's awesome. And I'm like, I know. It all worked out great. But what starts to happen is that when the stock market goes down, what happens is the companies lose money. And then what the companies have to do is they start having to lay off people. And then unemployment goes up. So I'm starting at the very first part of that graphic. Unemployment goes up because, again, the companies start to have to lay off people. And you have unemployment up. That leads to productivity going down, which basically means that our national product is going down. We're not producing as much. We're starting to see a decrease in how much we're actually making as a country. And the goods and services are not going to be produced as fast because we have tremendous unemployment. And what ends up happening too, because unemployment's high, people lose their jobs and their purchasing power starts to decrease. Okay? And when people don't have money to buy stuff, the economy starts to go into free fall. Now the question is, did this all happen just because a bunch of people started panic selling their stocks? The answer is no. If we look closer at what was going on in the economy in the 1920s, that gives us a better picture. The stock market crash only gives us part of the picture. It tells us the end result. This tells us the end result. Let's look at why it happened. Let's look at why it happened. Let's get into that. And that's what I want to spend a little bit of time on now. Longer term causes. Okay, so the Roaring 20s was roaring along, doing well. People were seemingly doing awesomely. The economy was expanding all over the place, but there were some serious problems, all of which are important. Number one, the United States economy was overproducing goods. You know, guys, girls, others, when you have production, and everybody knows this, like whenever, if you work in retail, does anybody work in retail? Oh my dear Lord. Give me a place where you guys work at. Target. Macy's and Target and stuff. Gym Max. I feel that. It's cool. Dollar Tree. Yeah, that's my kind of place. You guys know in retail that if you can't sell something, what do? Where's it go? It doesn't go to Ross Dress for Less right away, right? Where's it goes to what, on the clearance rack, right? eBay.
Our stuff goes to eBay.
Where do you work at?
Mainland, skate shop in the hall.
Okay then. And that's a specialized thing. That's a place I probably would never go. But who knows? No, but it goes on the clearance rack, and then they try to discount it, right? Basically. And that always happens in retail, right? Because you can't possibly, you know what I mean? Like you can't possibly sell everything. And what's happening in the 20s is they're producing so much stuff that it's sitting on the shelf. And then when you do that and people can't buy it because they don't need it or want it, it just sits there. And then the companies have lost money, right? Because they've spent all that money producing it. So we have a huge overproduction problem. We can't possibly consume the stuff that we produce. The second problem is that with a lot of the 1920s economy, we start to have the decrease in manpower needed because we have mechanized jobs on assembly lines. I'm not going to say we have robots, but we have machines that can perform simple tasks where you need less human labor. So that drives up the unemployment rate a little bit. You don't need humans to do everything. You don't need like 5 guys to run a little section of an auto plant when a new machine is built that can do it with like maybe 2 people or 1 person even. Okay, so the effect of that is it starts to drive up the unemployment rate a little bit. One of the biggest problems though is this. It's called the uneven distribution of wealth. I need to spend a little bit of time on this because this is huge. In the 20s, it is too simple to even say that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. It's like the rich are getting filthy rich. I mean, look at the statistics here. Just look at this. We're not even talking about the 1%. We're talking about the 0.1%. 0.1% of people at the top owned as much as the bottom 42% of American families. 0.1% of the population. And who are these people? What kind of people are they? These are tycoons. These are like Andrew Carnegie here, you know? These are, in our day and age, this is like the super rich. This, in our day and age, it would be like Donald Trump, Bill Gates, you know, Lady Gaga, you know, people like that. Right? Maybe not her. I don't know. Like a lot, like people with obscene amounts of money. Now let me ask you guys a question. If you had that kind of money, your life would be a lot better, right? Or maybe not. If you have that kind of money, are you more apt to save that money or spend it? Be able to save it more, spend it? What starts to happen is with that money that gets concentrated up in the hands of the very, very few, they don't spend it as quickly or as fast as a poorer person does, a working class person does. And so what ends up happening is you've got all this money trickling up to the top, and it just sits there. And that even happens today in our day and age, in 2015. You guys, let me give you a dollar figure to tell you exactly what I'm talking about. In the world today, a lot of estimates say that there's at least $15 trillion in savings accounts by the very top 1% of the world's population that are put into secure bank accounts all over the world. That money is not being used or taxed. Let me just say that, not taxed or being used in the countries of their origin. So you might have somebody like Mitt Romney, who ran for president in 2012, who has an offshore account where there's a lot of money being like stashed away somewhere where the government can't get at it. You might look at the richest guy in the world who's a telecommunications guy in Mexico, I forget his name, who has billions of dollars. It's being stashed away in a Swiss bank account where it can't be taxed. People that have that kind of money don't spend it, okay? They save it and it ends up in a bank somewhere. And that's one of the big problems here. You've got overproduction, people can't buy the stuff that's produced, it sits there. The money sits with the wealthy. Okay, now I don't want to sound like a communist here, I'm sorry.